Good morning and welcome to another UKDEA webinar. This morning's webinar is on business models and funding sources. My name is Simon Woodward. I'll be doing a brief introduction about the UKDEA before handing over to the esteemed cast of speakers we've got today. So just while people are joining in the room, we have two sessions this morning. Session one, we've got George Robertson from DESNZ. We'll be talking about business models. Moving on to Kit from Hermetica, and Carrie from Bevan, Brittan, who will be giving their view from the private sector in terms of local authority considerations, legal and commercial. And then we'll be taking a Q&A for 15 minutes. Followed by that, we will then be doing a rapid tour around the UK, from central government to national funds such as the National Wealth Fund, back down to London for the GLA, their funding sources, and then through to the Scottish Government, followed again by Q&A at the end. So please don't be shy. Do put a question in the question box at the bottom of your screen. There's questions and chat. Chat is for just a discussion between yourselves. Questions is where we can put questions for any of the speakers. So please do post them during or after. So let me just kick off quickly. So in terms of ourselves, we were formed actually 15 years ago, almost exactly to the date. And we were formed by 6 founder members, the UKDEA, largely local authorities, to create a voice for heat networks. At the centre of the association are full members. You can see the current full members at the bottom of the screen there, and around the outside of the associate members. We've called it full members because they're the people investing and owning in schemes. So in terms of the total members at the moment, we've got 170 members. We're the largest voice for heat networks in the UK. We've got a network of 600 individuals working in the sector who we're reaching out to, and we're split roughly 50-50 between manufacturers and consultants, and the other 50% people building schemes, running schemes, owning schemes. Benefit number 2, if you haven't come across us before, you're not a member, and this is the first time you've come across us. If you were a member, you'd receive a monthly journal. That's what's happening in the heat network sector, and also your chance to tell everybody about what you're doing as well. We've also got the UKDEA website, which is the core of the association, where we look at what the members are doing, what we're doing in terms of events. We've also got the important document library, which members can access with over 500 useful documents, many not available anymore. We've also got member meetings, contact with DESNZ. Well, we've got a number of representatives from DESNZ on the call. We're meeting regularly with people from DESNZ. We're running, I'll talk about it a bit more in a moment, we're running an expo on Monday with support from DESNZ. We work very closely with them, and there's a nice attestation there from Jodie Pittaway from SSC at the bottom. We also have member working groups, responses to consultations. We're literally in the process of meeting tomorrow to discuss the UKDEA response to the Ofgem fair price consultation. We also have working groups about heat network zoning, counterfactuals. We've had ones about sleeving, etc. So lots of things going on with the association to interact with members. Webinars, well, you're on a webinar today. We pride ourselves on offering most probably half a dozen feature-packed webinars every year. We recently had one on the new procurement regulations. The one today is on funding and financing. Quite often we focus on technical issues, whether it's practical applications of heat pumps or 4th versus 5th generation networks, or the role of local authorities in heat networks. So lots of different ones, and we try where possible to make sure that they're CPD certified. In-person events, very important for us to meet in person. Every year we have a presence at Future Build, which is the big low carbon building exhibition at Excel in London. We will be doing that again in 2025. That's over 3 days with 20,000 visitors. There's a little image there at the top of one of the recent Future Builds. The bottom is an image of our last conference that was in 2023. This year we've made it much bigger. We've actually got an expo. It's the UK's first Heat Networks Expo. That's on Monday. There's literally 3 tickets left. We're nearly at capacity. There'll be 500 people there, 50 exhibitors. So yeah, we've gone much bigger than the 400 in the end. So if you do want to attend, grab a ticket quickly, contact the secretary after the event. Training register, this is a document which sets out all of the training available from our members. Currently 30 members offer that. That's on our website. Some of it's free, some of it's paid. So if you want to get increase your knowledge in the heat network sector, please do look out for our training register. We've also got the jobs board for members, where members can advertise for free vacancies. There's typically about a dozen vacancies at any one time. And podcasts, we've now got 2 podcasts uploaded. I did the second one with Steve Hunt from Innovate recently, looking at the interaction of heat networks and customers, which was very interesting. And we're in the process of setting up another 2 as well. So please do look out for those. They're on all of the normal streaming channels. Awards, we will be handing out awards on Monday. Unless you've already applied and have been judged to win an award, sadly you couldn't win one in 2025, but maybe you could win one in 2026. There's our 2023 award winners. And benefit number 12, as a member, you will naturally get a place in the Heat Network Specifiers Guide. This is unique. It's a comprehensive guide to all organisations operating in the heat network sector in the UK, and the first edition is available now on the website. So that's a quick canter through the UKDEA. Membership fees are very low. Associate member, it's only just over £1,000 a year. Full membership is around £2,000 a year. So if you are interested by what I've been talking about this morning, please do get in touch. Or if you want to come to the Expo on Monday, please do get in touch. My details are there at the bottom page, as is my phone number. So without further ado, to try and keep us on time or slightly ahead of time, I will ask George Robertson from DESNZ to join the stage. And there you go, Tom's put his slides up. So George is joining us to very kindly give us a canter through business models for heat networks in heat network zones, plus an update on HNDU. So over to you, George. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Simon. So my name is George Robinson. I co-lead the Heat Network Delivery Unit in DESNZ and have kind of overall responsibility for heat network zoning regulations, business models, or if you like, the route to market, as we're calling it. How are we going to sort of bring these zone opportunities to the market and have a sort of sensible governance structure that will work with existing regime and sort of the planned future. So I'm going to walk through the thinking around that. I think we'll have a Q&A a bit later, which I'll save for. So if you go to the next slide, please. Great. So if we think before we even started talking about heat network zonings, I presented, I think back in 2023 at UKDEA event, talking about different business models we were looking at the time. And we can see those on the left. And sort of that was sort of thinking around largely around how local authorities would think about developing heat networks in their area. We produced guidance. There's the heat network. I think it's the financing heat networks in the UK guidance that's on our website. And this was a sort of a key sort of spectrum, if you like, of different delivery models going all the way from the local authority effectively being the developer with in-house delivery all the way up to fully outsourcing and letting a third party energy company develop the heat network with options in between. The acronym AZP refers to Advanced Zoning Programme. The Advanced Zoning Programme has been initiated by the department to support local authorities in accelerating delivery of zones in advance of the legislation that we're proposing to bring out, hopefully later this year, early next. And so under the Advanced Zoning Programme, we effectively narrowed this sort of list of governance structures with a mind to readying ourselves for zoning regulations, better planning for interface with those regulations, and placing the public sector more in a sort of stewardship or oversight position rather than sort of a default developer position, which had somewhat been the position previously. And so under AZP, we've fully standardized the procurement. All of these models, which I'll walk through, are procuring a development agreement. It's just what happens subsequent to that development agreement is slightly different, but the form of the procurement will be very close, if not almost identical, across all of the AZP procurements. And that was important. We're not ready yet to go to the next slide. Can you go back? And this is very deliberate. So the procurement structure is intended to be identical to what the competition structure will be for zoning, so that the rights that we are able to confer when the regulations, can we have the slides back? The regulations come into effect, will be conferable on a direct award basis to an AZP project. That's what we're trying to achieve. But because the regulations don't currently exist, we need a form of governance. So we need a contract structure. And so we have 3 contract structures. As I mentioned, the first contract in all of these options is a development agreement. That effectively takes us all the way to a approval gateway. And the approval gateway will say, well, have you met the objectives that we set out as part of the procurement? And that will be on how big the network is, and that will also be set by the procuring authority, and how quickly the network can be delivered. No one's kidding themselves to think that when you get to that approval gateway, if we said it's a 400 gigawatt hour scheme, that 400 gigawatt hour scheme is going to be delivered immediately, or on the phase that you're able to sort of bring to financial close now. But what you will need to present, if you're the developer, is effectively a credible plan under the development agreement to deliver, if it was 400 gigawatt hours, that 400 gigawatt hour scheme. So in the South Westminster Area Network, or SWAN, as we call it, which the department procured with the SWAN partnership formed of Hermetica and Vital Energy. Under that contract, which follows this model, they effectively have mandatory requirements of the development agreement, which sets out that pace and scale, among other things. We then have a special share, which says, okay, once we've concluded the development agreement, we're going to move into a special share model. That's where the authority has effectively a strategic oversight. It has the ability, if you like, to regulate the outcomes and behaviors of the network developer effectively indefinitely. And really what this is saying is, well, to be frank, it's all very well, DESNZ, saying that these regulations are coming, but they're not here yet. This is an advanced zoning program. What if you never deliver it? What if it never happens? Suddenly we have now oversight of these, what we'd class as strategic local assets. That's unacceptable. So the special share model is designed to address that uncertainty. And I'll come on to in a second, well, what happens when zoning does actually come in? We clearly don't want a situation of double regulation if we can avoid it. And the co-investor model builds on the special share model, which says, in addition to the special share, there's the ability under this model to allow the local authority to invest up to 20% of the capital required. But when we get into zoning, and so the zoning proposals one, the intention, and this is all subject to our consultation response, is that we move away from a contracting structure. We will have legislative powers, and so we will have the ability to have a legislative instrument. And our expectation is that in that consultation response, we will set out that, having reviewed all of the different sort of business models or ways in which a zone coordinator could interact formally with a zone developer, the conclusion was that a statutory consent that effectively sits as if you like, a permission to develop, build and operate a heat network within a designated heat network zone is a better structure than a contract. And the reason is that consent can sit on top of any pre-existing contract. So if we've got the AZP contracts, it could sit on top of a special share if that was deemed appropriate. I'll talk about that in a second. But it's more for the pre-AZP projects, where there might be a joint venture agreement, a corporate concession agreement, a joint development agreement that merged into something else. It doesn't really matter. The point is that the consent can sit on top of any of those pre-existing structures. The regulations will acknowledge existing heat networks, and they will have rights within a designated zone. And that way we can manage that interface of what's happened before and what happens in a regulated zoning world. And so the consent will be, if the consultation response is issued, we expect that the response will say that our proposed method will be that we will adopt a consenting approach We won't be entering into contracts like we've had on the left-hand side. And therefore, what it would suggest is that the consent will become the main governance model for local authorities in their capacity of zone coordinators for overseeing zones. And so where we have under AZP proposed a special share and procured that, there will come a point where it's like, well, the regulations have happened. That risk has been addressed. The concern that there never would be regulations has been overcome. And now actually what we need to do is say, well, what do we want as local authority? Do we really want to have a special share and a consent, both of which are fundamentally trying to achieve the same outcome? And within the special share contract, there's the ability for the local authority to cancel that special share. And so there is a route to exit that position once the risk, if you like, of the regulations never appearing has been satisfied. And I think that will probably be where those special share projects ultimately go. That would certainly be my hope, but we'll see as that develops, and local authorities will have decisions to make once they can understand and weigh up the relative merits of retaining both, pursuing being the zone coordinator, or just simply being the special shareholder. So decisions will be need to be made. The consent will have standard conditions. Those will be ultimately defined by the central or zoning authority, which will initially be DESNZ, and we'll try and standardize effectively those conditions across all consents across the country, a bit like the license conditions, say, in electricity market. Yeah, so the zoning coordination body, or we used to refer to it as the zone coordinator, so local authority will have powers under the regulations to manage non-compliance with those conditions. And those will be financial penalties. It could be the ability to revoke elements of the development area, so there's that we developed by the developer, or it could even be as extreme as requiring them to sell the network in the event of a material breach of conditions. And we've separately presented on what those kind of breaches might look like, but broadly limited to kind of community benefit outcomes. But anyway, that was a separate webinar. We can do it in Q&A, and I'm conscious of time. Next slide, please. Local authorities' role, I'll quickly rattle through this. Broadly, under AZP, the movement has been towards strategic oversight, and we expect zone coordination bodies to also be strategic oversight. That's their function. Their objective, if you like, is to deliver the strategic outcomes of the zone, largely linked to the pace and scale of low carbon heat delivery within a designated heat network zone. However, some local authorities may wish to be a network developer. And in that case, our expectation is that they'll likely need to win the right to do so. And this is largely linked to kind of competition law. Our expectation in the consultation response is that there will be exclusive rights. Next slide, please. There will be exclusive rights conferred to developers within a designated zone. And those exclusive rights effectively offer economic benefit. And so therefore, it will likely be necessary that local authorities, if they wish to be the developer developing that network, win the right to do so. And it wouldn't be a default position that they could simply invest into that network. So that will be an interesting part of the consultation response, and look forward to debate. Can they be both? I think the answer at this stage is probably not, but it's still sort of being considered. And the reason it's sort of slightly different, say, to a planning authority having a separate division to, say, house building section, is that the anticipated regulations are making a kind of very clear distinction between oversight of delivery and delivery. And there are some quite different, substantial differences between what a planning function within a local authority, its function, versus, say, a zone coordinator's function is trying to do. But I'll save that for discussion. Finally, just H&DU update. We're all aware that we haven't launched a funding round. If you go to the next slide. But our expectation is that we will publish information on how we continue to develop funding this summer. it's useful for everyone to be aware that the H&DU team, so the Heat Network Delivery Unit in the department, will be effectively staffing the Heat Network Zoning Authority, at least in the short term. So that means a lot of our kind of effort and time will be focused on fulfilling the functions of the Zoning Authority. And this financial year, a lot of our work is focused on increasing readiness of implementation and delivery of zoning. And so that's where a lot of our effort is going. And so it's things like AZP, pilot reports, routes to market, the national zoning model, and the sort of digital service that will sort of visualize zoning and provide a user experience ready. 2 minutes over. Sorry, Simon, but I'm sure we'll do Q&A.
No, absolutely, George. And just so you're aware, there's quite a lot of questions for you in the question session, as you most probably expect. So you're welcome to read, review those, and possibly even start responding to those if you like, George. Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, invite George to leave the stage and Kit Gillibrand from Hermetica Black to join. Kit will talk about energy network commercial considerations. So over to you, Kit. Do you want to kick off? I'll check your mic. Brilliant. You're all good.
Yeah, got it. Thanks, Simon, and thanks, George. Morning, everyone. I'm Kit Gillibrand. I'm a director at Hermetica Black. For those of you who don't know us, we're a development and asset management advisory business focused on decentralized energy projects. Point of the session today really is to share some of the lessons we've learned from bringing projects like OPDC and SWAN to market, and from some of the discussions we've been having with the 4 local authorities that we're supporting through the AZP program, who will be coming to market in the very near future. I think I can control the slides. There we go. So discussion with all of those promoters to date has really focused on exactly what you would expect it to have focused on. Levers for what those promoters would actually want to control, what they absolutely must control, and how that interacts with likely upcoming regulation. There's been a lot of discussion around disruption, so both physically and to businesses within and users within the area, and then some discussion as well around how social benefits and social value is actually delivered in practice. So if we focus on the project specific drivers, there's a little bit of interaction here with some of the topics that George has just gone through. I think what I'd add to that is there's not only a timing issue but a content issue for promoters. So in lots of cases the concerns around development of a heat network are in respect of things like carbon savings, price control, all of the elements that you would expect regulation to cover. But there are also some really specific concerns that those promoters may have. So for example, meeting heat on dates for key developments within the area, and indeed what happens with existing schemes, heat network schemes that might exist within their control or within their boundaries. So I think one of the things that we're very keen to see dealt with in the response and in the short term is how those contractual requirements which aren't dealt with by regulation are covered in a world where zoning and contractual obligations have to interact. So I think in terms of practical actions that those of you who are sort of at the start of this journey or even sort of further developed need to consider, I think it's really important to understand what are the drivers that you absolutely have to deliver within your areas, and to what extent those are likely to be covered by the upcoming regulations. It may well be that you get to a point where actually a contract is required and that's worth taking a step back from a future zone coordinator to role. I think it's very hard at the moment to say what that level of conflict is going to be that would trigger not being the zone coordinator, and I think there are some discussions to be had at a combined authority level or even up to central authority that might help to clarify those. In respect of disruption, I think this is seen by all of the clients we're supporting as a very real risk to projects. It's a really visible risk, particularly in respect of reputation. You know, as spades start going in the ground, people's lives start getting disrupted by major works. And what we're seeing sort of across a lot of those clients, and sort of, you know, particularly in areas like Greater Manchester, is the need for and the integration across utilities. So Gemserv, for example, has already convened a strategic working group that includes bodies such as United Utilities and Electricity North West. And we would expect there to be a requirement for heat network developers working within the area to join those strategic working groups to minimize disruption, possibly by aligning works, to work alongside highways authorities, for example, to make sure that roads aren't dug up repeatedly and that physical disruption is limited. There's a pretty practical benefit to having those working groups in place as soon as possible as well, of course, given that some of those organisations I've just mentioned, so water authorities, may well be sources of heat for networks, and starting early on those discussions to understand what might or might not be possible in respect of connecting to those pieces of infrastructure, and how that might be managed by a future network developer, are all good things to bring into a future procurement. In terms of the social value side of life, I think there's an emerging sort of interaction here between the GH&F market transformation commitments and the standard wording that's currently part of the AZP procurement packs, which focus primarily on skills and supply chain. I think that reflects the need within the market to build out more resilience and more capacity. And it also speaks to one of the main social benefits of this sort of infrastructure investment. Lots of inward investment within areas, development of local businesses, skills, jobs, etc. Over time, those will be required to replace jobs that may well disappear. So, for example, gas pipe mechanics, etc., etc. I think it's really critical when we're viewing social value that we recognise that it's a team sport. Lots of promoters, local authorities or otherwise, will have existing routes into organisations such as local education. They may well have existing routes to support local business development. And what I think we're seeing across all of the authorities that we're supporting is a real desire to make sure that social value commitments made during procurement are really clear and deliverable and are carried forward to an approval gateway that George described a second ago. Those mechanics already exist within the AZP procurement, and time will tell, but it would be good if they were also carried forward into the consent model in a post-zone coordinator world. So I think that the main point then to make on social value is to make sure that those benefits are real, and that we move beyond the sort of the situation I think we've probably all seen where social value is seen as a fairly limited how many apprentices can be deployed on a job, but reflect the fact that these are long-term infrastructure works that can stimulate massive economic growth within an area, and that should benefit all parties. So that's a very, very quick canter through some of the lessons learned today. Happy to take questions in the Q&A. But I think that the overall message is, without getting too far down the line, if you're considering one of these projects and you're considering what needs to be done first, I think those pre-preparation works, even ahead of any allocation of zone coordinator rights, are quick wins to be able to be sure of how you can get project success embedded right from the word go.
Brilliant.
Simon, I'll pass back to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Kit. A really helpful presentation covering all those commercial issues. So thanks very much, and please do leave the stage and join us again for the Q&A session at the end of this section. So thanks very much, Kit. If I can now invite Carrie Davies to join us. Carrie's from Bevan, Brittan. Carrie is a senior associate, and we'll be talking about energy networks, key legal considerations for local authorities. So over to you, Carrie.
Thanks very much, Simon. So I think my slides have been replaced by Kit.
I'll give you 2 seconds, just the screen's reset itself and I can hear you perfectly. So I will let
I
you.
am presenting Kit, and that's very nice. So yeah, as Simon mentioned, I'm Carrie Davies. I'm a senior associate in Bevan, Brittan's Energy and Resource Management team. We're a firm of lawyers. I specialise in energy networks and the law related to those. So thank you very much indeed, George and Kit, for your insights. As I'm sure you will all have noticed from the change of titles of the presentations for this session, as George and Kit explained, we're in something of a state of flux with AZP and other projects running, but at the same time, we're all aware that zoning's coming. So that being the case, rather than the topic that we originally advertised, I thought it would be helpful to briefly reflect on some of the ways that local authorities can start preparing for the changes. So somewhat echoing some of the points that Kit made, but also just going a little bit further. And I should be able to move my slides along. Yes, there we are. So there are various things that you can start thinking about if you're a local authority. And ultimately, it's about how the role of local authorities will change when zoning coordination comes in. So aspects that you're probably going to want to think about are your governance functions, for example, especially if you already have an energy network in your area. So you might also want to start thinking about whether you want to continue as a heat network operator or developer, which, as George mentioned, is not necessarily going to be the preferred approach, or whether the zone coordinator role suits you better, and if so, where is that role going to sit in your structure, and how are you going to manage resourcing and capacity? There are probably a limited number of people in the country who will automatically be ideal appointees for zone coordinator roles, so there might be a bit of a fight over those, so you probably want to start thinking about this early. In terms of zone development, does the national delivery model already envisage zones in your area? And if it does, do those overlap with boundaries of other local authorities? If it doesn't, do you have ideas about the potential zones you want to see designated? And what's happening in those areas now? What's planned for them? Is there planned housing or commercial development? Are there data centres planned, for example? If you already have indications of what parts of your area might be designated as a zone, you're probably going to want to start discussing with your colleagues whose functions are going to be affected. So housing, planning, development, all of those are going to need to feed into the process of putting in procurements for heat network zones, for example. Where there are boundary overlaps, or if you're affected by local government reorganisation, you're going to want to start considering how those cross-boundary relationships are going to work, the role of combined authorities, like as Kit mentioned, for example, and whether or not you start informal discussions and relationship building now to look at how you're going to interact. Where there isn't a clear indication about zones yet, and you want to start considering areas that will be suitable for zoning, you want to be thinking about whether any projected developments in those areas takes account of potential heat networks, because again, as Kit mentioned, this is long-term major infrastructure. So thinking about it early in the broader context of your local authority is an important thing to do. You probably have an energy and net zero strategy, and the question then is whether or not these are already aligned with what your potential role as a zone coordinator might be. And while we don't have the absolute specifics, there's quite a lot in the Energy Act already that gives us a clear direction of travel as to what the zone coordinator is going to be doing. So at this interim stage, you might want to revisit your energy and net zero strategy, see to what extent they're aligned with the potential zone coordination role, and whether you want to start considering the governance process of making any changes to those strategies. Where you've got existing networks or networks that are in sort of pre-development stage, now's the time to start considering whether zoning and your potential role as a zone coordinator might affect decisions that you're taking now. So obviously in AZP, this is all sort of factored into the process, but if you're not specifically in AZP, you might want to begin thinking about this. So if there's an existing network where you're a co-investor, or if you own an ESCO or shares in an ESCO, or you're working through OBC, pre-development stages for a network, you probably want to consider whether in taking the role of a zone coordinator, this is going to affect any decision making you have about how you structure the delivery models and the network to align with that future approach. We know broadly from the Energy Act that, and from consultations up to date, that there are going to probably be requirements to connect. So again, are there things you can start thinking about now in preparation for zoning? So where heat sources and customers are likely to be required to connect. If you're involved with a potential heat source like an energy from waste plant or a data centre, you might want to consider any agreements that you're negotiating now or that you already have in place, and whether those can accommodate a requirement to connect if and when a heat network's developed. Similarly, if you're entering into arrangements with commercial developers, for example, you might want to consider including provisions in your agreements now that require them to connect if and when a heat network is available. As I've said previously on multiple occasions, a key role of local authorities in heat networks is their role as a customer. And now is a good time to start reflecting on how you scope and manage that role. So regardless of where local authorities sit, whether they're going to continue to be directly involved in delivery of heat networks, or whether they're taking a more high-level strategic role as a zone coordinator, the loads that they can bring are likely to be critical to the success of any heat network. So it's worth starting to think about how your role as a customer will play out, what your minimum requirements are, what the loads are that you're going to be able to commit over time, and what decisions and agreements you need to put in place or need to have in place to enable you to commit those loads and to take your role as a customer. Moving on with slides. So again, just briefly thinking about things that you can do to get ready. Obviously, as a lawyer, I'd say this, but you might want to audit your existing contracts. So where you've already got a heat network, you're connected to one or you're planning to connect to one, you need to start thinking about the terms of your existing agreements and whether they give you the right sorts of protections and rights that you're going to need. Similarly, as I mentioned before, if you're entering into agreements with potential heat sources, think about mandates to supply heat and how you're going to make them connect to networks. Also, if the heat source is an energy from waste plant, and if you're, particularly if you're a local authority that's supplying waste, you want to think about the emissions trading scheme. And the other thing to think about, always, my slides seem to be doing a thing on their own, is to think about property. So a lot of aspects of a heat network are related to property, and you probably want to consider your role as a freeholder, but also as a landlord and as a counterparty to development agreements, and the extent to which any changes you're making now. So, for example, if you're revisiting all your tenancy agreements, as some local authorities do on at certain times, you might want to make those changes with heat networks in mind. So in short, I think, as Kit was saying, it's not too early to start preparing, even if we don't know what the future looks like exactly, and we're waiting for the consultation response. There are things that we can start doing to get ready. And, hopefully this has been a helpful list of some of them. It's a very brief, high-level set of thoughts, but obviously I'd be happy to discuss further and in more detail. And I can see that the number of questions is increasing rapidly. So I will stop now and let's invite the others to come back to the stage so we can deal with some of the questions.
No worries. Thanks very much indeed, Carrie, and thanks for everybody working with us. So Tom, if you don't mind putting the slides down, please, and George and Kit, if you don't mind coming back onto the stage, that would be super. Thanks very much indeed. George, so we're not hogging you totally. We'll deal with a couple of questions that I think Carrie and could go in Carrie and Kit's questions. So the one at the top, Carrie, that's literally just come in from Fabian. Carrie, what exactly can local authorities do to ensure new heat sources being developed, energy from waste data centres, large sewers are being designed to be able to offer their heat? Are there requirements that local authorities can set now for these resources? So what can local authorities do to make sure that waste heat sources are ready for the future in a legal view, or your view?
If the local authority is a counterparty to agreements with those heat producers, then obviously it's in your contracts. And if you're starting to negotiate contracts or in the process of negotiating contracts, at least putting in some kind of placeholder that says, if there is a heat network, you will undertake to discuss how to provide heat to it at a reasonable price is a way forward. If you're not in contract with them, then it's probably around starting conversations, really, because I mean, I think we know that some heat sources, and I'm sure you have a view on this as well, are interested in being involved with heat networks, and others less so. So it's kind of around having early stage discussions to understand what the appetite is as well, understanding that we will be obliged to connect.
Okay, that's great. Kit, I'm aware that Hermetica Black have done a lot in terms of sources, data centers, etc. Do you have any thoughts on the subject about what makes this work, what local authorities could do, what should be put in place?
Yeah, I do. I think, as you say, we've worked on a range of these sort of heat sources, and I think the really key thing is, as Carrie said, it's the early discussion. It's quite hard to lock people into doing something that might happen in future, maybe. So sort of an agreement to agree isn't particularly productive. But I think what we're seeing is that all of these heat sources are really keen to connect, because there's a benefit of some kind for each of them in doing so, be that a community benefit or sort of reliefs from ETS or similar. I think the really key thing from our point of view is that risk should sit in each of these cases where it's best controlled. So asking for guarantees which are inappropriate or offering indeed guarantees which are inappropriate doesn't get you very far. So I think early discussion and making sure that you're aligned with their business models to get the best outcome is something we've seen work well.
And there's also discussion across the sector as well as to, if you know that other local authorities are connecting to or are in discussions with particular sources of heat, like data centres, it's possibly worth having a conversation with them and finding out what terms they're looking at agreeing, so that there's shared learning as well. Okay,
cool. Thanks very much. I'm conscious that George has been busy answering many of the questions, but Susan's asked an interesting one, which doesn't relate to local authorities and specific schemes, but it did get upvoted, so I feel incumbent that we should try and respond to it. So how could community energy groups projects engage with heat networks, and what's their route to getting involved? So those smaller groups, any of the speakers feel that they're able to respond to that one at all?
Yep, I can jump in on that one maybe. I think it's a really great question, and it's driven primarily by what the interest in capacity and role those community energy projects could play are. So if they're a potential source of heat for the project, at a zonal scale, it feels perhaps slightly unlikely that they might take on a primary development role with for the entire network. But I think the best way to get involved is to engage with the promoter who's bringing those sort of opportunities to market, make them aware of what the interest is and how they could help, particularly in relation to things like social value, et cetera, et cetera. I think this all comes down to communication in the end.
Yeah, there's a big communication and education piece around the whole sector, I think.
Yeah, good.
I might just add, I think there's a strong focus on our side around community benefit outcomes as a core part of the conditions of the consent. And one of the elements of the competition will be sort of bidding back, what community benefit outcomes the zone developer, if that's not the community developer, if a larger organization wins those rights, what are they going to do? And if that local community group have already sort of engaged, if you like, with the zone coordination body, made it known that they're really interested, they want to be involved, then it strikes me that could form part of, we want to see this kind of outcome, you engaging with them, and that starts to be the tailored element, if you like, of the community benefit outcomes for that particular zone. It's not always the case that you've got a really active and engaged community energy group, but where you do, to my mind, that would make sense. And that's where not just communication, it's that direct relationship with the zoning coordination body. So when we designate a local authority as the zoning coordination body, it's at that point that organizations hopefully will kind of reach out. I think that's the most likely way.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. One question that's getting quite upvoted, and I think falls for you, George, but possibly others. It's the one from Steve Baggs. It's right. So the NHS is the one at the very top of your screen. NHS in their buildings could be key anchor nodes for heat networks going forward. Yet there seems to be some commercial legal concerns about contracting with a third party. How can we smooth this process? Do you have any advice? So I suppose really it's about how heat network zoning consenting will play within existing obligations to follow some kind of, well, it used to be EU compliant procurement process if you're procuring an energy services contractor. So did you want to cover that point, George, please?
Yeah, sure. So we're looking very closely at the interaction of zoning regulations with the Procurement Act 2023 and how to address this point, because fundamentally there's a conflict and we're aware of that conflict. What is that conflict? On the one hand, we're saying certain buildings of a certain threshold of heat demand will be, under the regulations, required to connect to the network. And on the other side, we've got regulations in the Procurement Act that say that a public sector or an entity covered by the Procurement Act must effectively run a fair and open competition to enter into a contract of this nature. So we're looking at options to address that, and they sort of range from an exemption all the way through to setting up, if you like, some form of framework that's Procurement Act compliant. So I hope that we will have an answer to that, but it's a complicated one. Changing the Procurement Act is not an easy thing to do at all. Setting up a framework to legitimize it is not relying on, there is an exemption within the Procurement Act as it currently stands in a single supplier scenario. And so another way could be to simply say, well, as a procuring officer, you are required to connect to this network. There is a single supplier scenario, therefore you can rely on that exemption. We think that's a bit risky to sort of rely on that. I hope that we will have a more concrete way to address this. And I think the kind of options we're exploring, as I say, is either specific exemption or some form of framework that means that actually they've already been, the developer has been onboarded and is effectively Procurement Act compliant supplier of heat and associated services. But we're very aware of it, and we're actively trying to work on addressing it. But it is quite difficult because there are different organisations involved who've got quite different views of how best to address it.
Yeah, I'll ask a subsidiary point, which is most probably on lots of people's thoughts. Really, the consultation document, you've kindly responded in the questions, saying that that's currently held up through some sort of a number of big ticket issues. There's also the statutory instrument as well. Can you give us a bit of a flavour, George? So the particular question you've just responded to now, when in the sort of the timeline or when in the process do you think people might start to get a sense, or in what document would people start to get a sense of what the solution is from the government? That's not going to come out in the consultation response, is it, presumably?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, we've got those sort of, I would say what I've just described there are the three options that we're considering. Right. So I'm discussing with our policy colleagues whether we make that explicit within our, I mean, there's a slight addendum I'd be surprised if we don't say something was the effect that I've just given in the consultation response. But yeah, these things are sort of, I'm sort of slightly on the periphery, so I would look to put those options in because those are the options that we're considering and that we've sort of discussed with Cabinet Office.
Yeah, okay. I'm conscious there's a question from Jeremy, but I don't think, George, you're particularly fair to put it on you at the moment because this is one that's about funding for building solutions. That's not within your purview of what you've been talking about today, really, is it? So no, I think that's a bit unfair to ask you of that, but feel free to jump in if you can. There was a question further down that you helpfully responded to in terms of that Jeremy asked earlier. Developments have been begun. What will happen to networks that have begun development, approach local authorities for permissions before the zoning regs come in and which are not part of the AZP? Did you just want to talk a little bit more about that? Because you have responded, and I think it's helpful for people to understand how those existing networks are dealt with. Yeah,
so we've sort of very early in the day, we sort of set out sort of the overriding sort of philosophy of what should the regulations do in terms of existing heat networks, and we're clear that the regulations need to protect the activity that comes before the regulations and before an area is designated. So it's important that we don't sort of accidentally stymie development because an area hasn't been designated as a heat network zone. And so therefore, when it is designated, we need a mechanism to respect what has been done and what's planned to be done. And so the regulations will have there'll be a number of different types of heat networks, but a core bucket will be existing heat networks. And an existing heat network fundamentally will have two definitions. One is, yeah, you're an existing heat network. You are supplying heat to customers. No two ways about it, you're existing heat network. But there'll be another definition which says, well, you're a planned heat network. So you're actually not supplying anything, or you might only be partly supplying heat, but you had a much bigger plan. And there the assessment will be is whether you've been endorsed by effectively a wider body. And there'll be a list that we maintain. But broadly, if you're GHNF funded, HNET funded, ERDF funded, if there was some sort of local authority investment scheme that was looking to support that project, it will be a sort of list that's maintained by the zoning authority to make sure that if it's been independently endorsed by an appropriate body, we recognize that business case and allow you to fulfill that business case. And so when designating that heat network zone, we'd effectively, as part of zoning refinement, we would say, oh, well, actually, this whole area is part of that business plan. We will remove that from effectively the zone developer's consent. They won't be able to develop that area. That is that existing heat networks development area. And we will then consider whether the remaining area is economically and technically viable for competition to award the zoning rights for that residual area. So that's how the plan is to sort of enable and let existing heat networks continue to fulfill their business plans. But it will be important that they have been endorsed. If it's just sort of we're doing it on our own, doing our own thing, never talk to anyone about it. But to me, that's the slightly riskier space, and it would be welcome to discuss that.
Okay, and following on from that, just a question which you've alluded to in the response to Fiona. Those existing networks, because there are quite a few of them around the country, understand that they'll be carved out and of the zone. Will they have quasi-zone developer rights, or will they have no zone developer rights?
It's great. So they will have they'll have rights. So they will be they will have zone developer rights to the extent that they're fulfilling their business case. So in that case, then they will be treated as if they were a zone developer for the area over which they have a consent. So they also will get a consent. Every single heat network, all the way down to a campus, will require a consent in a designated heat network zone. It's just the permissions differ slightly. But in the business case scenario, then yes, they will be able to benefit from zoning regulation rights. Right.
Okay. Good. Okay. I'm just working through the questions, and I see you've responded to a lot of them. Special share. Yeah, you've talked about that. You haven't responded. I think it's pretty clear. If and I know Simon, I see, has come from a local authority background. So near the bottom of the list, the question from Simon Phillips is, does this preclude in-house delivery? So this is in-house delivery by a local authority of a heat network. So if a local authority wants to deliver their own heat network, but it happens to be within the zone, but they just want to do that as their own project, how do you see that sitting within the heat network zone ecosystem, George?
Yeah. So I think the way that would... So, I mean, first of all, whilst the Secretary of State will reserve the right to designate heat network zones, the expectation is that the zoning authority will be designating zone coordination bodies to then designate heat network zones. So if a local authority is effectively in an area, it will largely be in control of its own destiny in terms of whether that's going to be a heat network zone or not. So if you want in-house delivery, you need never designate it as a zone. It would only be the most strategic networks across the country where, if you like, the department might say, well, for strategic national heat decarbonisation, we need to designate this area as a zone, and now we're going to use our rights to designate it.
Okay.
But then let's say they wanted to benefit from the rights, and they want to be the developer. If that was the scenario, then a separate zone coordination body would likely be needed. I mean, there's still the debate whether you can sort of wear two hats, and so that there is a debate. I'm not saying I have the full answer. I think the expectation is you can't wear two hats. We can debate that if you want, but if it were the case that they couldn't wear those two hats, then they would need to win the rights. So it would be a competition run by a separate organization, or if it was if we are allowed to sort of wear the two hats, then a completely separate team would be running that competition, and they would need to demonstrate that they are the best organization to be that zone developer, and then do the in-house delivery. So you can, it's just you need to be the best placed to deliver value for money for the customers of that network.
Okay, cool. No, that's really helpful. Thanks very much, George. And as you say, this is developing thinking from DESNZ anyway, so still lots of things to cover. I'm conscious we're out of time for Q&A. I'm also conscious, apologies to Kit and Carrie, that George hogged the questions, but then most of the questions were for George, because this is clearly a very topical point. So a really big thank you to the speakers. So to Carrie, to Kit, to George, thanks very much for that, much appreciated. And we'll invite you to leave the stage now, and we'll go into the second session, which is all about the various different funding sources. So slightly less contentious, but hopefully we'll bring a lot of questions. So I'll invite Ken to join the stage. Ken is going to kick off this sort of A to Z of funding sources with the Green. That's not very alphabetically good, is it, Ken? But with Green Heat Network Fund. So over to you, Ken, to tell us all about the Green Heat Network Fund.
That was me thinking I was a big deal at the top of your list, Simon. It hadn't occurred to me it might be alphabetical.
You are.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thanks for our speakers in that first session. I'm Ken Hunnisett. I'm the head of Clean Heat at TriplePoint. We're an investment management firm headquartered in a city of London that's a bit more temperate today after yesterday's boiling one. Such has been the success of the Green Heat Network Fund since its launch back in 2022 that it's benefited from significant inflows of capital since its £288 million launch. With the prospect of more funding in the spring 2025 spending review, DESNZ conducted a procurement at the end of last year, 2024, to identify a delivery partner for the next phase of the fund. I'm proud to say, TriplePoint was successful in that bid, which means that the multidisciplinary band of engineers, accountants, financiers and lawyers that came together in 2018 to manage the HNIP is back on tour. Some scores on the doors from the early rounds of the fund. We're currently in the middle of finalizing round 9. These numbers here reflect investments made in rounds 1 to 8. Thrilled to say more than £620 million worth of funding was awarded to 64 projects across England. That funding has unlocked capex of almost £3 billion, a little over £2.8 billion. In excess then of that 3-to-1 ratio public to private funds that was so important to Rachel Reeves and her Labour government when they came into power. The fund is demonstrably working. When the investments are built out, the projects are expected to deliver really significant carbon savings to a very substantial number of homes and non-residential buildings. A number I wanted to draw to your attention is in the bottom right-hand corner. Since the scheme commenced, we have funded an average intervention equivalent to 2.6 pence a kilowatt hour of heat delivered. Those of you familiar with the scheme will know that is quite significantly below the scheme maxima of 4.5 pence. It is an average. I'm going to say in the last couple of funding competitions, the average application was for significantly less than that. The point here, please, is do reach out to the TriplePoint relationship management team at the earliest possible opportunity to make sure that you have the best opportunity to represent your project and bring forward a compelling application for funding. The scope of the fund hasn't changed over the years. We are still able to fund low carbon networks and the decarbonisation expansion of existing networks. Unlike the HNIP that preceded it, the geographic scope is limited to England, but public, private and third sector organisations are all able to apply, and they can apply for construction funding commercialization funding and commercialization and construction funding too. I called this slide win themes. It's really things I'd like you all to think about if you're involved in applications yourselves or you're advising projects. We've spent a little bit of time this morning already hearing about the direction of travel on zoning, an understanding of the evolving legislative and regulatory tailwinds we're currently benefiting from is hugely important when you're coming forward with GHNF applications. Your networks are likely to be commercialized and built out in a regulated and zoned environment. So demonstrating an understanding of both those things is super important. Of course, we're missing legislation detail at the moment, but the direction of travel of both instruments is becoming clearer all the time. If you're in any doubt of that, well, you would have heard George talk about zoning this morning. If you're in the utility week crowd yesterday on the other side of the city, you will have heard Helena Charlton, Ofgem's new director of heat networks, giving a really clear idea of the regulatory pathway. As for instance, networks being developed in areas likely to be zoned that don't reflect zone level ambition are likely to underwhelm our assessment teams and crucially our investment committee. Kit really kindly shone a light on the market transformation commitments that exist within the Green Heat Network Fund, and they will be familiar to all of them. Please be bolder in the commitments that you're making. Speak with the relationship management team at TriplePoint if you've got any idea about what good might look like. These commitments are really, really important. In extremis, underbaked commitments have the potential to undermine future requests for funding. The GHNF has been vitally important in affording heat network infrastructure in the UK. Let's please do a better job of our market transformation commitments in this next phase of the fund. If you're in doubt, look at the GHNF business case. It's available online. Look at the social and economic growth forecasts that are available in that, and challenge yourselves to make at least a proportionate commitment to those contributions. Just as one, for instance, the £485 million that came into the fund in December 2023 was forecast by DESNZ to unlock as many as 12,200 direct jobs, good quality green jobs in the sector. That approximates to 25 jobs per £1 million of grant. Reflect on that number as you're coming forward with your applications and ask yourself if you can do more, be bolder. It's been a characteristic of the scheme for a little while now, but is likely to become more so. We're going to be looking for projects to evidence engagement with our National Wealth Fund. In just a few minutes this morning, you're going to be hearing from George Munson from the NWF. So I'm not going to talk to you about their funding solutions, but I will say that we aspire that the GHNF be available to support as many projects going forward as possible, and that we're keen to see evidence of the efforts applicants have gone to minimise their grant applications by drawing in equity or debt from the fund. Details of how and when to engage with NWF colleagues, well, you'll probably hear about it this morning, but if you're in doubt, it's back in our guidance materials again. Vitally important is that your projects and your applicants your projects and your applications are capable of persuading our assessment and investment committee teams of the deliverability of those networks by reference to really meaningful levels of documented engagement with key stakeholders, suppliers of waste heat, major off-takers. Crucially important too, as so many of them are, where those projects are anchored by public sector bodies, please reflect on and provide evidence of the extent to which you're happy that your projects and those potential off-takers have aligned government procurement and funding timeline plans. There is annuality associated with funding available under the Green Heat Network Fund. Funding interdependencies, procurement interdependencies have the potential to slow or frustrate development, which might mean that money made available to you isn't capable of being drawn. We try and figure out as much of that as we can at the assessment processes. We do that when making our investment decisions. The more you can do to articulate an understanding of all those things at the point you're applying for funding, the much more likely you are to benefit from an award. One of those funding interdependencies was the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and isn't it a shame that we're using the word "was" in that respect? This slide here is just to reflect on the fact that we have started to think as a team about the impact that the closure of the PSDS is going to have on the deliverability of many of our investee schemes, on the impact potentially on our pipeline of projects coming through. It caused us to send a survey out to those 60-some projects and the HNet projects before it to try and build an evidence base for an impact assessment on the PSDS closure. That's a process that's really only just begun. I'm being opportunistic this morning, taking the chance to say to you, if you have received one of those surveys, please fill it in as quickly as you possibly can. Please be open and honest when you do so. It would be hugely helpful in the work we intend to prepare and produce for the government. And finishing off, what might you expect to hear from us next? Well, I mentioned where we are in terms of scheme delivery. Hopefully we will be communicating round 9 investment decisions to applicants in that round through July. Before very long, we will hopefully announce new funding rounds. The first of those will be round 10, and you might expect to hear news of that over this summer. We benefited from an allocation of funding in that spring spending review. We're not going to get the precise detail of that until the Warm Homes Plan policy announcement, which is expected to be in October, but please keep eyes peeled for that. And all the time, you will expect to see news of further awards that the scheme's made, the progress that those developing projects are made through media and social media channels. You will expect to see news of future events that the delivery partner team is running. A number of those coming up are going to be focused on that really important MTC workstream. Simon's back on. I sense he's going to tell me I've run out of time. That is all from me, Simon. Thank you for having us this morning.
No, thanks very much indeed, Ken. And there's already a couple of questions in the chat for you, particularly about MTCs and market transformation. So brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Ken. Invite you to leave the stage, and we'll now ask David Hiller to join us from Gemserv. Hello, David. If you just want to start speaking, David's Programme Director, and we'll be talking about the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme. So over to you, David.
Hi. Good morning, everybody. I'm here today to talk about the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme, HNES. It's a scheme which Gemserv, as the delivery partner, has been running for the department since November 2022. But I should also add that we are part of the GH&F consortium. So we're on Ken's train and been on that journey since 2018 as well. So we've got knowledge and perspective from that side and from that funding scheme as well. I am a programme director within Gemserv, and I have ultimate responsibility for the delivery of HNES to the department. The one thing I'll just start out by saying is the primary difference between obviously GH&F and HNES is HNES has a strict focus on existing networks. So if you're building anything new, extending or replacing your primary heat source, we tend to refer people onto GH&F and Ken and his colleagues at TriplePoint to try and build out any applications there. So as I say, HNES focuses primarily on existing networks, and we've got 3 core aims and objectives which have remained constant since we started in November 2022, and it built on some of the work we did for the department in the HNES demonstrator earlier on as well. So it's all about reducing carbon emissions for those existing heat networks. So as we know, many heat networks aging, have many multiple problems, and there are simple ways in which we can make interventions into those networks to improve their carbon position. Secondly, is big focus around reducing customer detriment. So reducing outages on networks, getting better insight and clarity on pricing structures, and hopefully reducing the price of heat for consumers going forward, and building confidence in the network that supports them. And the third aim and objective of HNES is all around preparing the the sector for future regulation, primarily the Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme going forward. How much funding is available and what type of funding? Broadly, two types of grants that we award. So we award revenue grants, which are typically £15,000 to £20,000. These grants are available to organisations to appoint a third-party organisation or consultancy to carry out what we call an optimisation study. So this is helping applicants and organisations understand exactly where the problems are on their networks and to quantify those. On the back of that work, they should produce a list of potential interventions, cost those interventions, and make some recommendations as to which interventions they should take forward on their network to meet the aims and objectives of the scheme. The second raft of grants that we provide are capital grants. These have to be matched funded, so it's up to, but not including 50% of the award. And these are available for the delivery of eligible measures, installations and improvements on the existing network. And I'll touch on exactly what we fund under these two grant schemes in a little bit more detail. Who can apply? We're looking to focus broadly on the operators of district heating schemes and communal heating networks and systems. Unlike GH&F, we also support networks in Wales, but not in Scotland or Northern Ireland. So we're England and Welsh focused. Very much like GH&F, we support applicants from the private sector, public sector, local authorities, housing associations and third sector organisations. We've had applicants from the MOD, NHS, churches, charities, for example. And we'd always be looking for an applicant to be the legal entity that has the authority to sign off any decisions to make changes in the network that they are responsible for. So what can you fund? Well, in terms of a capital grant, they broadly fall into 4 categories. So we would be looking to fund any improvements in the energy centre or the plant room. This could be looking at things like network controls, pump replacements, removing pumps, pumping controls, etc. In the primary and secondary network, there's a real focus on pipe work. So it could be reconfiguration of pipe work, replacement of pipe work, insulating pipe work, or addressing any issues that you've got with HIUs. In the tertiary network, we're looking at things like system balancing, flushing, and controls in terms of TRVs, etc. And then the third area of capital grant funding that we support is metering. And this is the installation of metering or broader metering equipment, where this improves the operator's knowledge of network performance. So it enables them to get a better understanding of how their network is performing, and also hopefully addressing any customer detriment that the network may be causing. So that's what's eligible in terms of the capital grants. On the revenue side, where we pay for an optimisation study to be undertaken, the full specification can be found in Annex A of the guidance document, which you can find very, very easily. But basically, an optimisation study covers baselining of your KPI data within your network. It would support some data capture to substantiate your optimisation study. It would pull together a long list of potential interventions that you wanted to make to your network, cost those interventions, and then make a balanced recommendation in terms of which interventions should be taken forward. And these interventions can be taken forward by potentially moving to a capital grant through HNES or via other means in terms of other funding streams. What have we achieved so far? We have distributed around £60.3 million of funding across both capital and revenue funding, impacting over 300 heat networks and benefiting over 62,000 residents in those accommodations. And just to the right there in that sort of collection, just some of the areas and sectors that I've touched on before, where we have provided funding to those different areas. We have funding projects all the way across England and Wales, not just focused on the urban conurbations of London, North East, North West, East Midlands, West Midlands, but some outside of that as well. A real good spread in terms of the geography of that funding. And to the left in the box is sort of the typical type of capital interventions and projects that we've supported via HNS. We just recently announced round 8 outcomes, where we have awarded £7 million to over 49 different heat networks, including a range of different projects. We are currently in the middle of assessing round 9 applications, so applicants will hear in the next 3 to 4 months as to the outcome of their applications for round 9, and we have round 10 planned in and secured. So I'll give some dates on when round 10 is open and when that closes later on in the summer. There is an interaction between HNS and the Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme, which will hopefully be emerging sort of late this year, early next. And HNS can obviously help provide some of that funding to enable the existing heat networks to improve their efficiency and effectiveness to meet those upcoming standards. So it can really help networks to be prepared for that coming technical standards. Really important, and an area where we're starting to see a lot more sort of interest and applications coming forward. As I mentioned, round 10 will be opening early August. We are transitioning away from an Excel-based application form to more of a digital solution. We'll be providing details on that in August, and our round will be closing in September. I can see Simon emerging, so I'll give it 30 seconds.
No worries.
Contact us at various different places if you want any further information or guidance. We've got a team of relationship managers that can assist with any initial questions, queries, clarifications. So please do reach out to us, and we're available on LinkedIn and X, and join our mailing list if you want to keep really up to date, and also obviously subscribe to the DESNZ Heat Networks mailing list as well. Thank you, Simon. I think I've just made it.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Much appreciated. A really good canter through what the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme offers to applicants. So I'll ask David to leave the stage and invite George Munson. George is the Assistant Director for the National Wealth Fund, and George would be talking about investment, current and emerging offers. So George, did you want to kick off just so I can make sure I can hear you speak?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. No problem at all. Over to you, George.
Great stuff. Thank you, Simon. So yeah, I'm going to be giving a quick rattle through some of our current and emerging offers in the district heating space. So I'm going to very briefly touch on who we are, give a quick snapshot of our market view, touch briefly on the local authority advisory service, and then focus more on lending, the local authority lending side, and the NWF financial products that we are currently have available and are working on. So for those who don't know us, NWF was originally set up as the UK Infrastructure Bank back in 2021 with two core objectives. One, helping to tackle climate change, and the second being supporting regional and local economic growth. And Heat Networks has always been squarely within our mandate. In October 2024, we were rebranded from UKDEA to NWF. There hasn't been a huge fundamental change to our mandate. We're still working on our core sectors, but we have significantly more funding available, so up to 27.8 billion, and we have an even higher risk appetite. We're currently developing some further areas that we're working on with governments. These core sectors that we had originally set up have been expanded to cover things like green hydrogen and green steel. But this is very much a developing area, so transition rather than being kind of a revolution of what we do. I think interestingly as well, we on the local authority lending side, we also provide free at point of delivery advice to local authorities, which is typically a sort of critical friend offer. Definitely not stepping on the toes of consultants, but providing another pair of eyes to look over projects with local authorities, focusing on the commercial and financial aspects of any project they're developing. Looking at our view of the market, we took a snapshot a few months back, kind of reflecting on the market, and really important to stress that it's not reflecting on the market participants. We know the heat network space is a really passionate, collaborative, and an innovative sector, but it does have a number of challenges which are just frustrating a number of us, and we're not seeing opportunities grow and develop as quickly as we like to hit the kind of targets that government would like heat networks to deliver. We find that a lot of the issues are really interrelated. There's some that we can help deal with, that some that government are dealing with, some that the industry needs to deal with. But some of the most challenging ones are around the significant capital costs, upfront capital costs, where there is a lack of certainty in terms of the customer connections and the heat demand at the end of the day, and just the need to sink that funding into the ground before you can even begin to talk to customers seriously about connecting. Zoning will help with that problem, certainly. There are also conflicts that we're seeing day in, day out between the drive for low carbon and the cost of the gas counterfactual, which exists in most buildings. The extremely wide spark spread is causing issues, real frustration for developers, and policy conflicts for governments. We're sure that this is something that is being addressed, but it just causes an issue at the moment. And we also see quite regularly that there are issues around the certainty of customer connections, which are just negatively impacting on business cases. So we think that there are bits that we can help to solve in that area as well. Looking very briefly at our advisory offer, I've already touched on it before. This is kind of critical friend role we provide. Just wanted to emphasize that we can support local authorities throughout the heat network development cycle, from the very early stages right up to the more advanced networks, ones that are thinking about changing structures. We have a view and some expertise in all of those areas. And also emphasizing that we are not a substitute for consultants. We work quite closely with a range of different consultants, picking ways that we can add value to work that's already planned. And these are just a few examples of some of the areas that we work with in the UK, emphasizing work in all constituent nations. And one of the key things that we always emphasize is that local authorities are all utterly different, with different drivers and different opportunities, but we are beginning to pick up quite a lot of commonalities and themes with the authorities we're working with. I won't labour it now, but it's going to be in your pack that will come out later. And focusing on the local authority lending side, we think the best offer for local authorities in terms of financing for networks that they choose to develop themselves, in that we can provide low-cost finance. It's about 0.4% cheaper than PWLB, and critically, we can also offer flexibility in the way that the funding is drawn down. So we can offer payment holidays during the construction phase. We can then look to roll up interest during the early phases of during the construction phase, we'll roll up interest, and then in the early phases of the network, we can sculpt repayments to reflect the project revenues. We really try to take a project finance approach to heat networks and do our very best to help local authorities achieve a net zero revenue impact in the early days as networks are being built and then growing. We're really pleased that we have managed to close one deal with Solihull in the heat network space. Rich is going to talk about that one in just a moment. For me, it was a really great opportunity to help the colleagues around NWF to understand some of the issues and the intricacies around the heat network space. So walking it through the approvals process, we think we learned a lot about how we can better intervene in the heat networks, both on the local authority and the banking investment side of the organisation. And I'm not going to go into this, it'll be in your pack. This is an explanation of the process that we tend to go through, typically 2 to 3 months to sign off a local authority deal. On the private side of the organisation, we have a remit to invest in sectors that don't currently have a mature market. So absolutely in the heat network space. We have a requirement to generate a return, even though it can be quite low. And we have a much bigger risk appetite than the majority of market participants. To date, we've trialed quite a number of different approaches to funding and financing heat networks, but as yet we have not closed a deal on the banking and investment side. So we're trying some alternative approaches. Before I go into the one that we are working on hardest, the patient equity, I think it's also worth reflecting that we are working with government and GHNF, thinking through what role we could take in customer connections, particularly focusing on that post PSDS environment. We're just a little bit too early to say anything specific about that today. So the one that we're working on most closely is the patient equity offer. This is something we've been developing in close dialogue alongside several key heat network developers. And it's a concept where we invest equity alongside a developer, taking between 20 and 49% stake in a heat network. Equity is then drawn down by the developer during the build-out phase. And then critically, when the project begins to generate distributable cash flows, the developer takes 100% of those up to the point in time that they have achieved the return of capital invested. It then flips, and NWF would get then 100% of the distributions to catch up to a point where both parties have received their initial investment back, and then both parties then take a pro rata share of the distributions from that point onwards. We think this is really important in that it helps to de-risk some of the risky phases of heat networks, where a developer needs to put the money in the ground without the certainty of customer connections, and particularly in a zonal environment, that can be very significant amounts of money relying on policy to deliver the customers to the network. We are essentially a policy bank, so our remit is to take some of that policy risk. So we're effectively planning to put our money behind the policy that government is developing. So if the networks don't achieve the customer take-up as expected due to issues with policy or the like, it's NWF that would take the hit earlier rather than the investors. So this is something that we're really keen to work with the market on to test and refine over the next few months, and happy to take some questions in the session afterwards. But Simon has appeared, which I think is my nudge to stop talking. So thanks very much.
No worry, George. I think you were nearly at the end, weren't you? There was only one final slide to go, wasn't there? So
that one.
Yep. Yes, excellent. There you go. Well timed. No, thanks very much indeed, George. A really good canter through, and yes, I'm sure many people will be interested in that very intriguing offer on your second to last slide. So thanks very much indeed, George. Now I'd like to invite Richard Long to come to the stage. Richard is a heat network advisor from Leap Utilities. We've been involved with the Solihull Council network, and Richard will do a little case study about actually using funds from the National Wealth Fund. So over to you, Richard. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Simon. Where I am today, it's still in the high 30s, so I'm wilting a bit, but hopefully get through this. So those of you that know me will be aware that I wear several hats in the heat network sector. So today I'm sitting here as an elected councillor on Solihull Council. Amongst my other responsibilities, I sit on the shareholder panel for Solihull Energy, which is the council's heat network project. For those not familiar with where Solihull is, it's on the east and southeast borders of Birmingham. It's a town of about 250,000 people, and probably best known includes the NEC and Birmingham Airport. Solihull Energy is a wholly owned council heat network, which is in the construction phase. The picture on the left there I took 3 days ago, so it shows that the energy centre itself is quite advanced. And as George just mentioned, it was, well, it's actually the first, I think it might still be at the moment, the only project to have received national wealth funding for a heat network. The project was approved by the council, for some context, back in October 23. We then contracted as a council with Vital Energy to provide the design, build, operate and maintain services in July of last year, with construction starting shortly afterwards. The first heat on is planned for this autumn, and then the completion of this first phase in February 26. So that's the network shown on the bottom right, which is the picture George also had. The scheme's based primarily around a large air source heat pump, but probably unusually now for the time we're in, includes a gas CHP engine, which will be phased out within the 15 years. But it was a key component to ensure that the scheme was commercially viable. It includes a private wire and also integrates with the solar PV that's on an adjacent leisure centre. Primarily, the scheme is serving schools, council offices, plus some commercial offices as well within this first phase, but there are plans to grow it substantially over time. If we move to the next slide. Thank you. So as mentioned, the scheme is fully funded and owned by the council. It does so through a special purpose vehicle. The key reason that it chose to invest itself was a point touched on earlier by Kit around, from Hermetica Black, about ensuring greater control in terms of delivering council priorities. While some of those could ultimately be covered under the regulation, certainly at this moment in time, the council wasn't sufficiently confident in that. Then probably the other key reason was the scheme is considered probably a marginal viability for most private sector investors. So through the council, we have a reduced cost of debt, which comes through the National Wealth Fund, and also lower cost of equity and project return criteria. And with it, without the council taking that lead, it's unlikely the project would have been viable and able to happen. Clearly, by taking that control, we take on quite a bit of risk as well. So we seek to mitigate that through onboarding of expert consultants. We've got a very well-defined design, build, operate, maintain contract with Vital Energy, with clear responsibilities, which also includes them assisting us in growing out the network. And we are in the process of recruiting an experienced non-exec director. And hopefully my place on the shareholder panel, unusually a councillor with someone that knows something about heat networks, will also help de-risk the project for the council. In terms of the funding, the simple diagram on the right, George mentioned we secured National Wealth Fund loan. That goes into the council itself. That was at 40 basis points lower than Public Works Loan Board. That equated, I think, to something around 5.1%. The council then on-lends 6.1 million of that to the SPV, and then has used the remaining amount as equity injection into the project. The project also received HNIT grants and also a smallish grant from the West Midlands Combined Authority to cover the sort of full 18.7 million investment requirement for this first phase of the project. And then the SPV has contracted that down through Vital Energy and the design, build, operate, maintain contract. The advantage of National Wealth Fund, not only that it's the lowest cost source of loan to the council, but as George touched on, the flexibility was really important in terms of the phasing of the loan. and sculpting of it to the construction programme and being able to roll through that interest. In terms of the challenges on the council, I think it made a lot of news over the last couple of years that most councils, which include Solihull, are under pressure to cover their day-to-day spending. But actually, in common with many councils, Solihull actually has quite a comfortable headroom to its capital borrowing limits, which commonly referred to, it says CFA, it should be CFR, which it can use for infrastructure investment. And the National Wealth Fund provided a low-cost mechanism to unlock some of that investment capacity. There is one challenge, though, associated with the National Wealth Fund on lending to an SPV, and that this comes around because of the subsidy control rules. Now, this isn't consistently applied across different schemes, so different councils will take legal advice as to what premium they need to apply to any on lending to reflect what would be seen as a commercial rate. And I've seen examples where that on lending premium has been as low as 0.5%, and on some other schemes where it's exceeded 10%. Clearly, if you're applying that upper end, then the interest rate value disappears, and essentially you're passing additional costs onto your SPV, even if the main council itself as the borrower has access to those lower funds. So it's sort of putting a additional cost link into the project. I think that there is a concern that councils don't fully understand what they need to apply as a premium in these instances. As mentioned, they will go for legal advice. It would be especially helpful if a National Wealth Fund or government as a whole could provide some guidance as to what is an appropriate premium for on lending within the public sector to make sure that people aren't disadvantaged in projects. And then the sort of third point, and this got covered earlier, thank you, George Robinson, that certainly the zoning proposals as seen in the consultation very much were sort of dissuading majority owned council projects. Certainly in my view, this would limit the number of schemes that could be delivered, and particularly at the medium and smaller scale. So I was pleased to hear from George earlier that the consultation response is likely to be a bit more flexible in this regard and potentially not require a local authority to go down the zoning route, even if they're not seen as a key zone opportunity. And certainly my concern would be that if we do push the public sector out, then it does potentially ignore the previous success the public sector's had in delivering heat network projects over many years, and some of these of material scale, and many of which would not have happened had the council not provided the sort of low cost investment long-term viewpoint, and also the focus on some of their core priorities. I think that was all I was looking to cover, a quick whistle-stop tour, but happy to pick any questions up within the session at the end.
No, that's brilliant. No, thanks very much indeed, Richard. A really good canter through your project, and some really good challenges at the end there in terms of those points that you've raised. So thanks very much. There is a question posed by Oliver. It's actually ended up in the chat section, which I've asked him to put into the question section, but one for you has come in, Richard. So I've invited Richard to leave the stage and to Phillipa Ellis to join us. Phillipa works for the GLA and is the LEA program lead, and we'll be talking about the Zero Carbon Accelerator. So over to you, Phillipa.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, I work in the energy unit of the Greater London Authority, and I used to manage a programme called the Local Energy Accelerator, which funded and supported low carbon decentralised energy networks, including heat networks. That programme is finished now, but we have the Zero Carbon Accelerator. So in a nutshell, the Zero Carbon Accelerator is a programme aimed at helping organisations to decarbonise their buildings and achieve London's net zero target, which is net zero by 2030. Now, in the Mayor's zero carbon pathway, there was an approximate cost put against reaching net zero by 2030 in London as about £75 billion. So both financing and support for project development are critical to realise this ambition. The programme was launched last year in September, and it aims to meet its net zero target, as I said, through providing revenue funded support, which includes advising organisations on how to decarbonise their buildings, increasing skills and understanding of decarbonisation, developing decarbonisation projects ready for funding through the various streams, and just to mention the Green Finance Fund, which will be covered by my colleague Elise after, is providing the initial tranche of funding for this programme. And it supports organisations to manage the delivery as well of decarbonisation projects. The programme links directly to the three of the mayoral mandates. In total, there are about 15 mayoral mandates, but the three of them that are relevant to the Zero Carbon Accelerator are reducing non-residential emissions, and the ZCA allows non-domestic public sector buildings to be supported, improving London's housing stock, and social housing is included and supported under the ZCA, and upgrading London's infrastructure. And there, in this case, the ZCA will support the development of heat network projects as well as retrofit measures and renewable energy. So the objectives of the programme are to support organisations to take a holistic approach to decarbonising their building estate, to enable decarbonisation projects to get to a point where they are investment ready, to develop projects that are suitable for investment, including through the Green Finance Fund, and to support organisations to procure and manage the delivery of decarbonisation projects. And the development stages have been split into the 4 Ps of prepare, which is the early stage, plan, procure, and perform. And perform is like the delivery of the projects themselves. So funded support via the Zero Carbon Accelerator includes expert consultancy, offering technical expertise in all areas of decarbonisation of buildings, skills development, enhancing organisational capacity through training programmes and webinars, developing projects so that they're ready for investment, and helping with procurement and finance and accessing funding. So the Mayor of London is delivering this programme in collaboration with our delivery partner, Mott MacDonald, Energy Saving Trust, and an alliance of experts who you can see on the screen there. And this is just an example project of one that is due for submission but is likely to be funded. Kensington and Chelsea are looking for technical insurance and due diligence in the delivery of their Nottingdale heat network. So that would replace gas boilers with renewably heated network, making the estate carbon neutral by 2030. So that includes about 800 residential units, a school, a leisure centre, and business units. It is a continuation of the support provided by the Local Energy Accelerator, and the total cost is about 50 grand, with an estimated capital investment of 50 million and carbon savings of around 8,000 tonnes a year. There's a case study on the Zero Carbon Accelerator website about Pepys Estate in Lewisham. So the Zero Carbon Accelerator is supporting Lewisham with estate-wide decarbonisation plans, including a heat network connection. And just to mention New to the website is a green funding and finance finder, where you can select which organisation you're from, select the type of technology, and then select whether your project creates a financial return or not. And then it'll come up with various options for funding in London. So that's a whistle-stop tour, basically, but do use the website. There's Knowledge Hub there. There's frequently asked questions, case studies, guidance and tools. Subscribe to our newsletter, join the LinkedIn group, submit an expression of interest, and contact us. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Phillipa. Really good, and a good run through the Zero Carbon Accelerator, so thank you very much. And I see that Elise has already joined the stage. I think Elise isn't running with any slides, so Tom, if you wanted to pull Elise's slides down, I'll over to you, to Elise, to talk about the Green Finance Fund and EDGE.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, lovely to be here. My name is Elise Anly and I am a project manager in the GLA Green Finance team. We deliver primarily two funds for London, which is the Green Finance Fund, the GFF, and the London EDGE Fund. We're going to attempt to cover both in a very short amount of time. So please bear with and ask as many questions as you care for in the chat, and I'll get to them hopefully. So starting off with the GFF. The GFF is a debt finance instrument. So we only provide debt finance to public sector organisations and museums. They have to be based in London, and the delivery of the works have to be in London. The financing mechanisms, we only cover capital. So unfortunately, we're not able to cover any revenue costs. However, as a sort of debt financing instrument, we're able to come in alongside any other sources of funding or finance that a project has secured, which means that we are very happy to come in alongside National Wealth Fund. I was going to say PSDS, but sort of heat networks funding, any grant funding, your own internal capital grants or capital sort of budgets. However you are wanting to sort of piece together the sort of funding puzzle, the GFF is able to come in alongside or cover the cost in full. We have a preference for projects that are going to implementation within the next sort of 18 months. That meaning procurement happening in the next sort of, or procurement starting within the next 6 months typically. This is not a hard and fast rule. It's just to illustrate that the GFF has been set up to accelerate the transition to net zero. As Phillipa mentioned, the mayor's targets of 2030 sort of rapidly approaching. And so in allocating finance to projects, we will take a preference to projects that can be delivered really quickly, or that can evidence that at least one phase of many, which is often the case of heat networks, can be delivered within that first sort of 24 months of a loan agreement being set in place. So that's the sort of the high level sort of timeline. In terms of rates, we offer really competitive rates, similar to the National Wealth Fund. We can offer 40 basis points below PWLB certainty. And that is for organisations that can already access PWLB. For organisations that can't access PWLB, we'll offer, I think, 20 basis points below certainty. However, on top of that initial guaranteed 40 basis points, we will be able to, or we are often able to find solutions that can increase that level of discount. How we do this is very project dependent and will often be a result of sort of a conversation with us, a sort of a back and forth as we go through the application stages. But most recently, we were able to give a local authority 1% below PWLB certainty, which obviously is quite a significant savings for a local authority when considering what debt finance mechanism they should use. In addition to the sort of discounted interest rate, we are also able to offer a significant amount of flexibility in terms of both the loan structure and tenure, but then also on how you draw down the finance. So that we will, for example, not ever issue a fee for due diligence. We will not, you will not incur any fees for not drawing down the full amount of finance, and you will only pay interest on the finance that you have drawn down. And our interest rate is set at the point of drawdown. So say if a organisation has £10 million in funding, draws down £5 million in tranche 1, they will only pay interest for that £5 million set at the point of drawdown. Then the second tranche drawdown of £5 million will then have a different interest rate depending on what the PWLB rates are doing. So there's opportunities there for a local authority to be strategic in when they draw down the finance. We sort of encourage that that bit of I was going to say financial literacy, or just monitoring the markets, shall we say. So that's the sort of long and short of it. In terms of loan size, we can offer loans as small as £1 million, and that can be aggregated from several projects. We say that we typically won't be financing over £75 million, but this is very project dependent. So if you have a sort of mega project, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll discuss the sort of ins and outs of the project, and we'll see what we can make happen. In terms of timelines, we just opened the GFF for a round of finance now last week during London Climate Action Week, and we will remain open for expressions of interest until the 4th of September. The expressions of interest form is really easy. I think we say on the website that it should take an hour to fill in. I would be surprised if it takes anyone more than 20 minutes. And I really encourage everyone who has a project in mind to submit an expression of interest so that you're on our pipeline. I think this is our 5th round of expressions of interest. And in the previous rounds, I've always been very confident in saying we will open another round of expressions of interest. But we are a £500 million fund, and we have committed over £320 million and have quite a significant active pipeline of projects. So I would really encourage people to sort of put their name down now, just in case we don't open for sort of another formal round of expressions of interest again in the future. So just so you're aware of sort of what that I was going to say pressures on, but yeah, it's a finite fund, and we're doing our best to get it out the door. For the London Edge Fund, it's a slightly different fund, whereas the GFF we manage completely in-house with our London Treasury colleagues. The GFF is managed by London Edge. Sorry, it's managed by SDCL, which is an external party. They offer more sort of end-to-end project financing. They can offer energy as a service model. They can offer equity finance, and they're able to help both public and private and joint ventures. So they have a slightly broader remit than what we do at the GFF. In terms of loan size, they require typically a £10 million minimum loan size payment, and it's a fund size of about £100 million. So, but they haven't committed any funding yet. If people are interested in exploring what sort of that equity finance route might mean, for example, if on balance sheets debt isn't an option for you, if you're an NHS colleague, no, there's typically sort of CDEL limits that can be a hindrance. London Edge Fund might be a good option. I will post the links in the chat for you to get involved. It's harder to give sort of the rates, descriptions and stuff for the London Edge Fund because they will offer more bespoke solutions depending on the project. And there's a sort of slightly longer, more bespoke process of finding the solutions that really work best for you and your organization. And that is typically happening in conversation with SDCL. And I think that's my time. Sorry for the whistle-stop tour, but I'll share some resources later.
Yeah, if you could send those to Tom, Elise, then we can send those out to all delegates. So thanks very much, Elise. That was really interesting and fascinating to find out what London is offering in terms of finance. I've got some of my own questions for you and how you compare to George, but I'll hold those for the Q&A session. So invite Elise to leave the stage and for Alastair to join us. So I can see, Alastair, you're there, and I can see your slides up. Did you just want to take that, Alastair? I can check I can hear you okay?
Hello, yeah.
Perfect, brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. So Alastair's going to talk about Scottish funding sources, and he's head of heat network delivery for the Scottish Government. So thanks very much, Alex.
Hello, everyone. Joining from what is now quite an antiquated iPhone SE because my browser can't allow me to share video. So apologies if it falls about and if I look a little bit funny. I'm head of heat network delivery at the Scottish Government, running our funding programmes. I'll just give a quick run through of the support on offer in Scotland for the deployment of heat networks. So, not to bore people on why heat networks are a good thing, but I think it's helpful to provide a bit of perspective on why Scottish Government want to roll out heat networks. First of all, a key priority for us is trying to resolve fuel poverty, and we see heat networks as a key way of doing that whilst achieving heat decarbonisation. So we want to roll out heat networks that obviously initially connect anchor loads initially, but then try to connect as many buildings as possible to decarbonise and help provide affordable heat to domestic dwellings too. Another key thing is efficient use of energy, very keen on using waste heat sources and thermal storage. So particularly where we've got a constrained grid, which is quite common in Scotland. Want to grow some green jobs, and importantly, we want to try and leverage investment into heat decarbonisation, both public investment and private investment. Just a quick overview on the funding available. So we've got kind of full support through the development and construction of a heat network, starting off with the Heat Network Support Unit and then leading into Scotland's Heat Network Fund. So the Heat Network Support Unit, it is there to help get over those risky early stages of heat network development, providing grants and providing advice. It's set up in 2022 and it's been really successful so far. We've got a really strong team working on the Heat Network Support Unit, similar to the HNDU for England. Ours is a partnership between Scottish Government, Zero Waste Scotland, which has really good technical capability, and Scottish Futures Trust, who can really help with the kind of commercial questions, legal questions, and that creates a strong team that provides good advice as well as grant funding. In terms of the support available, so we provide 100% grants up to 50 grand for feasibility studies. Again, appreciating that feasibilities are fairly risky undertakings, not quite, and you can have low confidence that it results in a capital project if we don't know if it's feasible or not. So we provide higher intervention rate at that early stage, and then look to try and get a bit more buy-in from co-investors at outline business case stage. I have 50% available for up to 75 grand. The support through the HNSU is largely aimed at trying to increase the capacity and provide funding for public sector and local authorities in particular. We also provide strategic support for local authorities as of last year, which has been going really well, and it attempts to provide technical support for maybe a feasibility study up to get a feasibility study CP1, and then at the same time also provide support for local authorities to consider delivery models, help them answer the kind of big questions in terms of do they need private sector investment, which the answer to that is often yes, and then if so, how do they want to try and leverage private investment, what level of control do they want to have, those sorts of questions. So we've done that with 7 local authorities so far, mostly the kind of big cities in Scotland, and yeah, going really well. Okay, moving on to capital funding. So we've got Scotland's Heat Network Fund. For those familiar with the Green Heat Network Fund, it runs in a fairly similar way, except from we're Not lucky enough to have TriplePoint running it for us. It's managed by myself and a small team. But yeah, grants available for up to 50% for construction of heat networks. Yeah, the programs doesn't have the same level of demand as what the Green Heat Network Fund does, maybe kind of naturally because we've got less urban areas in Scotland. But yeah, we're really starting to see accelerated demand now. That might just be because we've got a funding deadline coming up, which is quite natural. So this was launched in 2022 as well. The intention is to have kind of fairly long-term windows for heat network funding rather than taking that kind of funding call route. We might go to more limited funding calls as it becomes more competitive, but right now we prefer to leave things quite open. We have funding up to March 26 because there's elections due for the Scottish Parliament in May 26, but we are very aware that that's not long enough right now to build a heat network, so it's something that we're working on, and yeah, keen to try and provide a longer term signal of funding being available to the sector in the short term. Basically, like, ministers are on board. We see a strong business case for continuing to fund heat networks in this way. Yeah, so hopefully we'll have some news soon and I won't be done out of a job as a grant funding manager. Types of programs we support. So yeah, new zero emissions heat networks, communal heat networks, expansion of existing heat networks where the expansion is low carbon heat, and then also for fuel switching of existing heat networks as well. So I'll just round this off by giving some tips in terms of what we're looking for. I think Ken did something similar earlier, and I think it's quite helpful for people to see. First of all, it's key to demonstrate to us why a grant would provide value for money for the Scottish Government for a project. First of all, that means showing us that costs are being managed appropriately and that you're taking a good procurement route. And then also just evidencing the strength of outcomes, whether that's decarbonisation or fuel poverty, those sorts of things. So it's important for you to articulate why a proposed heat network aligns with Scottish Government's objectives. A key thing as well is additionality, so demonstrating why this project needs a grant. Have you explored other financing options? And importantly, in terms of both additionality and value for money, what will happen if there's no grant provided? Will it be business as usual for the buildings involved? What is that business as usual? What are the other low carbon options? It's also important to demonstrate that the proposed technical solution for the heat network is a good one in terms of its outcomes and in terms of value, and showing that that's a better option than maybe alternative low carbon heat options. And yeah, just to round it up, some quick tips. Give a sight of what's coming. We've got a fairly small team with an open door. Good to get things on our radar. We've got a kind of expressions of interest form online, so yeah, I'd encourage anyone filling that in if you're interested. And that includes those that maybe have projects that go beyond the current deadline of March 26. Still keen to see what's in the pipeline and basically help us build that case for extending funding. As I say, I'm pretty confident we'll be able to do that, but yeah, please get in touch if you've got projects coming. Submit a good application as soon as you can. Make sure we've got plenty of time for our kind of due diligence process and that we're not going to screw up your programme. Clearly demonstrate why the grant is needed, as I mentioned earlier, and present a good business case that reviews the options. Why this heat network? Why that heat source? Why that investment from the Scottish Government? Okay, I think that's all from me. Some email addresses here if you want to get in touch, or if not, I'm sure colleagues can connect this up.
Brilliant, lovely. Thanks very much indeed, Alastair. So if you don't mind, Tom, putting Alastair's slides down, and if I could ask Ken, I know David's had to leave, so Ken, George, Richard, Phillipa and Elise to join the stage. That would be very helpful, and we'll just run through a few of the questions to wrap up the meeting before we draw it to a close. So I think we've kind of got everybody. Ken, I'll leave you to ask your own question to Alastair as to whether you want him to manage your fund or not. But
He was kind enough to ask.
yeah, absolutely. So let's sort of work down from the top. Elise, I see you were typing, but if you could just confirm that the GLA's GFF, what's the source of the funds, please? Robert has asked.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're capitalised by the National Wealth Fund. We've received a significant loan from the National Wealth Fund and are essentially working as an aggregator.
Right.
And then we are using the GLA revenue budget to provide some of those additional discounts I discussed.
Okay. Maybe a question for George and Elise. Your offerings are subtly different, I think, the GFF and National Wealth Fund. So, Elise, you said the loan size could go down to 1 million, I believe, for GFF. Whether George, I think the minimum for public sector is 5 million under the National Wealth Fund. Is there an obvious reason why the two are different?
So I guess the National Wealth Fund has been set up to serve the whole of the UK. I think it's a brilliant partnership with the GLA. They have the ability to speak to London boroughs. I've got relationships with boroughs, universities, hospitals, the wider ecosystem. So they're far better placed to be able to probably run a kind of a lighter due diligence on applicants and make sure that all those kind of early discussions take place so they know exactly what they're planning to invest in. So we'd love to do more of these sorts of deals with combined authorities, so there can be a kind of a locally relevant fund set up that is able to do things that are a little bit more fleet of foot than we're able to, but we're there as a backstop certainly for those larger projects.
Okay, cool, excellent stuff. Moving down the list, I'm conscious, Richard, you've responded to it, but also whether it was driven possibly. I don't think that GNHF, certainly HNIT, there used to be a requirement, I think, Ken, to set up a local authority SPV for funding. That's gone under Green Heat Network Fund now, hasn't it, from memory?
It has.
It has. Okay, so Richard, I know you've responded to that. So it was mainly about compartmentalising risks as you saw it and inviting in future funding?
It is. I mean, often councils do that. I think my internet reception's going. Can you hear me?
Yep, just about hear you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So it is mainly about that compartmentalising the risk and the management, as well as ensuring that we can get specific skills on the board, so the non-exec director and the like, to ensure that those risks are managed effectively. Okay,
cool. Thanks very much indeed. Alastair, as you're on the screen, a similar sort of question to yourself. In Scotland, what's the view about whether the local authority, if you're giving them your capital funding, do they have to do it through a separate limited company or through them directly themselves, or is there any particular criteria that has to be followed? If you could, did you hear the question, Alastair? Sorry, I don't know whether you heard the question. You're on mute at the moment. Okay, well, we'll come back to Alastair in a second, hopefully when he managed to unmute himself, and go back to George, if you don't mind. Policy risk. So you mentioned policy risk. There was a question about geothermal. What is the policy risk that you feel you'd be comfortable to take in terms of consumer connections? Can you give us a sort of a bit more of a description of what that would be that Eloise has picked up in the question?
Yeah, so I think geothermal we see as a real kind of technical risk. It's quite a kind of a binary risk. They tend to either work brilliantly or really not work at all. And in kind of early stage heat networks, that's a huge impact on the operational phases, the revenues, all sorts of things. So from that perspective, it's quite a tricky one. But we see with a more kind of traditional heat network, which may be taking heat from waste or from wastewater treatment, or even kind of mine water, where there's more of a proven resource. The issue is always that kind of believability, the chicken and egg situation. So a heat network developer has to at some point build a network, but it's very hard to get customers to get very excited about the network until it's been built. So we think that by putting in this kind of patient equity approach, which essentially says that if the revenues don't come through quite as anticipated, the National Wealth Fund's investment will bear that loss, delayed revenues, rather than the developer's own revenues. It would allow them to get to a point of financial close earlier with fewer confirmed customers on the network. That's our thinking around it, because a lot of the feedback we had around the debt finance that we were looking to offer was that actually it doesn't really help kind of change move the needle on that because of that customer risk. If you put debt onto a project, there'd the expectation that the debt is then repaid following the debt profile, regardless of what customers are doing.
Okay, and just finally a question for you, George. Are you planning to spin that into the public sector, this sort of equity, or is it only for the private sector?
So yeah, I guess we need to kind of walk before we can run. We're testing it with the private sector at the moment. We have had a couple of inquiries from the public sector as well. I think there's a possibility where there is a SPV outside of the council's books, but we're just not there yet at the moment. We want to kind of get proof of concepts in the private, and then I think we would then look to see where that can go.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much. And Alastair, sorry, just if you can hear me now and okay to respond. So in Scotland, what's the view about delivering it directly through the council or through a council-owned SPV? Is there a specific requirement with your funding sources, Alastair?
Yep. Sorry, Simon. I was using my clumsy thumb to try and get off mute, but it just wasn't happening. But I'm here now. Yeah, I think so. To answer your question, no real requirement on like what the vehicle is from a local authority, but I think like from terms of with my kind of heat network support unit hat on, which is a bit closer to local authorities, I guess like we support the council to think about what's the best vehicle for them. I imagine like the key aspects would be management of risk and also like setting up efficient governance of the heat network as well. I think those are key aspects. So but yeah, no real preference from a capital funding point of view. Okay,
cool. And Ken, are you there? I see you switched your camera off. I had some questions for you that popped up in the chat.
I'm still here, Simon. I've got camera problems, but if you can hear me, I'm still here.
No, that's fine. I think not maybe avoiding some of the questions you've answered, which is slightly more not problematic, but you just can't do. I think maybe just taking a bit more about these market transformation commitments and local authorities. I think that was an interesting question from Antonio. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that and your response? I think that'll be helpful for people to understand.
Yeah, it would be a real pleasure. As I was trying to say to Antonio, I think your audience, Simon, are going to be the long-term beneficiaries of a transform market. So it's disappointing when applications come in that underwhelm. The T is really, really important. We're talking about transformation. How are we going to close the skills gap that is inhibiting the sector's growth? How can we conduct procurements in such a way that it opens up the supply chain to new actors or drives different competition? So we really are encouraging people to be as bold as they reasonably can be, or more to the point, as bold as they credibly can be. We want things that are ultimately quite deliverable. How a local authority articulates that when then at the time they're bidding, they don't know the delivery partner is a really interesting one. It's a challenge we've confronted already. We expect local authorities in their procurements to have social value requirements on those prospective delivery partners. We'd like to see some of the detail of the requirement that's passed down to them in the response to us, and as much additionality as the local authority can muster. The question was a good one about jobs, which is perhaps the most difficult one to answer. I provide it as an example in the slide deck because we've got a number to hang our hat on. We've got that DESNZ number that was linked to the business case. But of course, there's any number of other commitments and as vitally important actors in their boroughs, whether they are network sponsors, off-takers, or just just responsible for planning and convening. You know, we expect local authorities to be a force for good, and as much as they can tell us about what their requirements will be of their delivery partner, the better.
Okay, brilliant. No, thanks very much indeed. That's much appreciated. Okay, I think we've naturally come to the end of the session. We've got all the questions in the chat. We don't seem to have any others raised. So I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our speakers today. So currently on the screen, we've got Phillipa, Richard, Elise, Ken, Alastair and George. Thanks very much indeed for giving it the time. Much appreciated. Thanks to everybody who's attended. I see we're getting lots of thumbs up at the bottom of the screen. Much appreciated. And we'll draw the event to a close. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Simon.